So we spent an hour talking about
We
feet.
did. We did. We did. I'm proud
Honestly,
of
didn't
us.
think we were going to.
We have feelings. We got
Apparently
feelings.
so.
Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We are here to help train your eyes so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 24 years and I have about 26. Tonight we're covering a topic that was requested. We got a message and we'll read it for you, but we're basically going to be talking about shoe choices and how it affects technique and all of that good stuff. So
Yeah.
I think we'll start with reading our question.
Yeah. So this comes from an anonymous nerd. Because I guess our people are nerds. Anyways. They say one thing that I would love your feedback on is footwear. How do you feel about the clunky tennis shoe fad, especially on women? I feel that some very pretty dancers are now limited in the articulation of their footwork by wearing an inflexible shoe that gives them a flat foot and heel leading walk. It is odd to me to see no arch in the foot. I love it that Melissa Rutz refuses to wear anything but her proper open toe swing sandal. And they finally ask, if you were judging a live swing comp, would you mark down a dancer for wearing a shoe that does not enhance the footwork and just look at their body movement, connection, etc.? And basically, at the moment we got this question, we were like, "Oh, this is juicy, yes." It was so juicy that we scheduled it right away. We were gonna do it, but then a storm locked Alicia in her bathroom. So that's why we're not going to do
fun.
March 23rd instead of earlier in the month.
Do over. Hopefully no tornadoes this time.
Yeah. Just calm with her. It was really weird getting ready for this episode and it actually being light outside because clocks moved. It was quite unsettling. I don't like it. Anyways, so some of the topics we're going to be talking about tonight are flexible versus stiff shoes, heels versus flats, feminine versus masculine, and also invisible disabilities. And then, of course, based on that last question, our take on what judges should be doing when judging. This again, this is all opinion, and everything that we share today is just to help everyone make their own informed decisions. So we're not trying to compel anyone to think what we think. That's never what we're doing here. We're just trying to give you as much information as possible so you can make empowered choices about your own dancing.
Yeah. And obviously we do have our own opinions, but I mean, there's so many different reasons for people to make different choices. So,
Yep. And that's why we're going to be getting nerdy tonight.
Yep.
We're going to be looking at quite a few different videos tonight. We're going to be looking at one of Jessica and John, another of Melissa and Parker, another of Susan and Glenn, Torri and Ben Morris, Torri and Kyle, and Virginie and Maxence. So lots of different examples of both leaders and followers wearing their footwear and doing their dancing. I'm just gonna let's go to the screen share, shall we? Doodly doodly doo.
That was great.
Thank you. I'm getting more sarcastic with my transitions somehow. Not entirely sure what is going on in my brain, but here we are. Thinking maybe we should start with Melissa and Parker because both of them have the more traditional shoes on and it's pretty easy to see their feet. Does that sound like a good choice?
Sounds good.
Awesome.
I mean, the main question that we got was really about shoes for followers. But so a lot of new dancers, when they first get into the scene, will get the advice that they should start in heels. And that goes for leads and follows. And there's a reason why. So, we kind of talk about them sometimes as being like training wheels, before maybe moving on to other kinds of shoes.
Either a
Now,
rubber heel or flats or something else.
yeah, exactly. So the reason that it's kind of a training wheel, right? In our dance, right, we roll the feet, and that is heel to toe to heel, whatever. So if you have a heel on, you are forced to roll one way or the other, basically. Um, what happens when most people are just walking, they aim more for like a midfoot, right? When they're stepping.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a heel on, you just physically cannot do that. You can't step there first.
Right.
I mean, maybe you could, but that would be some really weird circumstances. Um, but that's why we kind of consider it like training wheels to start with heels. And now, like, as you kind of progress and you kind of hone your technique a little bit more, you'll be able to control more of the rolling, right? And that's when you can kind of start looking at other shoe options. And I mean, you don't have to start with heels, but it will make it harder for you initially.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of just naturally gets the feel into your body. So then when you move on to a different type of shoe, you kind of just want to feel that type of movement,
Right.
even though the shoes are going to feel different. But yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about just for heels, just
In general.
initially.
And in this video, so we have Melissa in the kind of traditional super dance sandals, and then Parker in what looks like Air Allens, so with like half-inch or 1-inch heel for the leader. And I remember when I started, the full like Cuban block heel was really popular for both leaders and followers. And I remember I danced in that for ages. And the reason I stopped is because my Achilles tendon was like, "You're not dancing in these anymore. Stop it." So that brings me to a really important point, that wearing heels is not a benign thing to do to the human body. And depending on what any sort of like invisible disability, visible disability, chronic pain, anything, like if you have back pain, that could be because of the shoes you're wearing, for example. So it's really important that if you want to improve your dancing, you're not sacrificing your physical health in order to look better faster. And so that's one of the things that I think when we get around to the judging question later is, personally, I would never mark someone down specifically for their shoe choice. My job as a judge is to judge the technique. That's what I'm there for. I'm judging the dancing. The shoe doesn't factor into that, because and tell me if you agree or not, Alicia, because I feel West Coast swing, it's a social dance. It's a much more casual dance to do, unless we're talking about classic and showcase, right? And it's not like we're doing international Latin that has a very specific dress code and shoe code. And whatever works for you to help you feel safe to move in the way you want to move, so you're enjoying the dance you're doing. Personally, that's what I prioritize. And as someone with a lot of medical issues and chronic pain issues and joint issues, shoes has always been a bane of my existence in West Coast swing, finding a good shoe for me. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to pick this topic. Let me switch to another video while you talk some more. If I can find my mouse. There it is. Sorry. I didn't know where it is. I'm like, okay. Do you want me to stay on this video?
No, go ahead. Okay. I was just gonna kind of mention that one thing to take into consideration is, you can also choose to wear different shoes when you are competing, if you compete, and then when
Mhm.
you social dance, if you want to do that. I personally feel like that's probably the best way to go about it. But, I think that I say that because when you are competing, the aesthetics, like the look of your lines and whatnot, are more important because people are looking at you to judge you.
Mhm.
Um, so, I think that if you don't like the way that flats look on you, but they are super comfortable for you to dance in,
Mhm.
just dance in them most of the time,
Yep.
and when you compete and it's more of an aesthetic thing, then choose the heels or whatever shoes are not as comfortable for you.
Yep. That reminds me of a really funny story because that was me for a couple of years. I just social
Mhm.
danced in flats and I competed in my supas.
Yeah.
And I did strictly with Andrew Slack. And I was in
Hmm.
my supas and he seemed very confused the whole time. And we talked about it afterwards and he was like, your center was higher and I wasn't prepared. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. Um,
That is something to take into
I
consideration.
know, because like being able to transition from flats to heels seamlessly is another thing that requires technique. Otherwise, it's going to drastically affect how you move. That
Yeah.
might make it harder for you to calibrate to the role you're dancing in.
Mhm.
So here we have a great video. We've analyzed this video. I think we've also analyzed the last video. So we've got John Lindo
Yeah.
and Jessica McCurdy, and she's in heels, but she's got bootcut jeans, and
Hmm.
so that's another thing that the pant plus shoe combo, especially for follows, has a huge impact on lines.
Yeah.
So this is a more this is a more dated fashion. I haven't seen
Yeah.
someone in bootcut jeans and heels in a long time, but it still looks good. Now it's become more popular to wear kind of cropped straight leg dress pants and
Hmm.
flats or heels,
Yeah.
and having the ankle showing.
Mhm.
But again, that's another like if your technique doesn't allow for your ankle to be showing, it's going to make it harder for you to do well
Yeah.
competitively. All right. So I want to point out a little bit about John's shoes because yes, he's in
Yeah.
sneakers, but they're also fairly flexible sneakers.
Hmm.
So he's getting some rolling through the foot. He has more articulation of the foot, even though he's in a flat and it's a sneaker. You can still see him using his whole foot.
Hmm.
And so that brings back the whole like flexible versus stiff shoe.
Yeah.
And again, that might be a medical issue for some people because the stiffer a shoe, the more support you have.
Yeah.
And if you're someone who needs that, that there's nothing wrong with that. In general, it is better to have a more flexible shoe from a dancer's perspective.
Yeah.
But if you need a stiffer shoe to be safer and to have less pain, you do you.
Yeah,
Um,
on that, if you are somebody that needs more like arch support or something, but you would
mhm,
still prefer to dance in the more flexible shoes, there are arch supports that are like the gel type that will
mhm.
just stick onto the shoe. And that's a good option. That's what I use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that brings up a really good point. Like the right insoles support arch
Hmm.
support, heel support, to kind of correct any natural misalignments that you might have from your feet up to your hips can be life changing.
Yeah.
Um, so we recently had a student, we discovered he was dancing on the inside edge of his foot. So kind of collapsing his arch and dancing on the inside of his foot. We just told him to get arch support and he's
Hmm.
experiencing less pain and he looks a lot better.
Yeah.
Um, and while it can be harder to find insoles or orthotics for heels, it's definitely worth it. That's something I've been going through recently because this is something, if you didn't know your feet could do this, the length of my arch, my instep, is indicative of a size 11 foot, whereas the length from my heel to my toe is indicative of a size 10 foot. So my arch is a full size too big for the length of my foot. So most heels feel like there is nothing but air between like my mid heel all the way to the ball of my foot, and it is quite terrifying.
It's such a strange problem.
It is. Can I stop being special? Thanks. I hate it. I would like to be normal. But no, that is not in the cards for me. Anyways, back to my original point. It's worth it. And even if you have to go to like a physical therapist or a foot specialist to help you find the right insole for your shoe, I highly recommend doing that.
Yeah, very important. It's one of those things that will keep you dancing longer and help you feel healthier.
Because you should be able to feel really stable. If you're just standing in place or practicing just standing static on one foot, your foot should feel really stable in your shoe.
And it's especially important in heels. Like the extra height can really give a lot of instability.
Yep. Oh, this dance is so fun.
I think most of what we're looking at we've analyzed.
Yeah. And because this episode is the episode of 5,000 links, I'm not even going to try to put them in the YouTube cards above for the recording. They'll just all be in the description box below. Yeah. I'm also going to throw in a fun video from a fashion historian, Nicole Rudolph, who also specializes in shoes, like actually making shoes. And she recently did an episode about sizing and fitting of shoes. And it was really cool and nerdy. Highly recommend. So I'll drop that down below too.
Speaking of which, I think looking at Jess's feet, like one of the things that is pretty important for heels, especially, like they should be a little tight when you initially get them because they will loosen up. And so a lot of times your toes might be like right at the edge. Like they're not going to fit in the same way that most normal shoes would. And it's just because of the material that they're made with and the, extra stress that you put on them. And you want to feel like you have more control, especially with the front of the foot. And so if you have your toes like way far back from the front, if you have an open-toed shoe, you're not going to have as full control and you're going to have extra fabric that's kind of getting in your way.
Yeah. I actually had a coach for a time who preferred her toes to literally extend past the shoe so she could feel the floor with her toes directly.
People do.
Yeah.
Not my preference, but
no, that I tried it for a hot second. It was, oh man, the blisters I had breaking in those shoes.
That's what comes to mind for me is like just blisters on your toes.
Which brings us to like never wear a new pair of shoes because you can buy shoes at dance events.
Yeah.
Don't buy them on Friday and dance in them all weekend. Don't do that to yourself, please. Maybe dance in them for a couple of songs each day and that's it. And then go back to the shoes you've been wearing. Break them in slowly.
I mean, that goes for any pair of new shoes that you get in terms of dance shoes. Like you need to break them in slowly.
Yeah.
Don't like have them initially and then just immediately go into a full night of dancing on them.
Yeah.
Not a good choice.
Yeah. I will admit I did that once.
Yeah.
That's how badly I needed new shoes. So sometimes that's your only option and we get it.
Yeah. It's a little nicer to your feet to not.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to look at Susan and Glenn, and Susan is wearing tennis shoes and she tends to wear flats and usually these tennis shoes these days.
So these shoes look a little bit less flexible. And here's the thing about that. The flexibility, it will make technique easier for you. Um, but at the same time, if you have solid technique, you should be able to show the roll through with a stiffer bottom to them. Like it doesn't, it will look a little different, but either way, you should still see a fairly visible roll through. Like you can still see, even though there's not a ton of flexibility, like in the midfoot on Susan, like you can still see that she is placing the heel, rolling to the toe, placing the toe, rolling to the heel. It's a lot more energy, and you have to think about it more unless you're like really used to it. Um, I
Yeah.
think that it can, like we in our question that we got, it can look a little strange if you are not working through with correct technique. It can look like you're really, inflexible because that's what the shoes are doing. But you can make it look okay.
And I want to highlight while we're watching this video that Glenn's heels look like they're about an inch high. So it's much more common for leaders to wear heels than I think most people realize, even at this point in time. Because I know Jordan's sneakers have become really popular.
Yeah. And, I think on that note, like, I think for a lot of leads, the heels are good to have like shorter, like not the like with the Latin type heel.
Right.
That is going to be, like we were talking about, good for the kind of training wheels. But in general, I think it's a really nice to have a little bit of a heel. But yeah.
And I'm just gonna freeze frame on this beautiful dip for a hot second. So it's not simply that a heel allows you to easily strike either with your heel or your toe, like it's impossible to strike midfoot, like Alicia was talking about earlier. But when you're in a heel, oh my God, can I draw? No, I can't. Pretend that's a foot. I don't know why the toe's so big. Ignore that. But what's happening is the ankle is just in its resting state extended in a heel. So to go from there to a more pointed foot is literally less range of motion. You don't have as far to go in the same amount of time. Whereas if you're in a flat and you go from your resting state, which is just like a perfect 90-degree angle, to a straightened ankle, you're literally going through more range of motion. And then the same thing when you're grounding into your heel, it is easier to get a lot of power when you're lowering down to a heeled foot, because it's like you get to the floor faster to ground into it. So it's just a very sneaky way of letting your ankles do the things they want to do anyways, with less effort. And I'm going to delete that horrible drawing now and move on.
I mean, it's a very good visual. So
thank you. Just had a
minus the really large toes.
Yeah, it's hammer toe. I think one of the next things to talk about is the concept of feminine versus masculine. Because in the standard gender roles, femme presenting people follow and masculine presenting people lead. But those kind of strict gender roles are just, we don't abide by them perfectly anymore. Like we have such a beautiful community that's growing in its diversity, and we're seeing more non-binary people, more trans people, and it doesn't matter what gender you are, you can dance whichever role you want, and it is wonderful.
Mhm.
And so the idea that if you are in a feminine presenting body, you need to wear heels, that unspoken rule bothers me from a
Mhm.
gendered perspective.
Mhm.
And so again, if I were judging, I'm there to judge the dancing. And if a dancer chooses to use a tool, because a shoe is a tool, if they're choosing to use a tool that makes their job harder and they don't have the technique to handle that higher difficulty, um, I'm not going to judge them any harder or any easier. Like, I'm not going to give them a hall pass for having a higher difficulty, but I'm not
Yep.
going to judge them harsher for having a higher difficulty, because you can have two follows dancing next to each other in the heat, one in heels, one in flats, and their technique is basically the same.
Mhm.
But it's going to look worse on the person in flats. But it's my job as a judge to realize, oh, their technique is basically the same. And instead of letting the shoes being the determining factor, I look for something else within the technique itself to be the determining factor between two dancers.
Yeah, and so I think like with that, the main thing that you're looking at, right, is visually how it's presenting.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's visually presenting as you have a roll through your foot, um, it doesn't really matter. You should be judged for that specifically, just if there is a roll through the foot.
Mm-hmm.
And, like if the technique is clean most of the time, all of that type, like it just visually needs to, that's what it needs to be looked
Mm-hmm.
at, really. Um, and like the actual shoe that's on the foot shouldn't really matter that much. It's just, is the correct technique happening?
Tangent, I totally forgot about her little hop right here. That's so cute.
So these are kind of different. I think Torri's, the shoes that she has on are more popular now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think they're a kind that is a little bit more flexible. And one thing that I want to mention is she has shoes on that are flats, but they're more of a nude color, like they're not black,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to automatically make the focus less on your feet.
Yeah. And I
And
will
that's
add that these do have, I think, a half inch or a 3/4 inch heel. So they're not
yeah,
perfectly flat.
yeah,
And for those who have danced in pure flats versus like a really itty bitty heel, the itty bitty heel helps so much.
yeah, yeah. But like at first glance, it does look pretty flat, like
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah,
terms of
they
what she,
read as flats.
yeah. But, that still has a little bit that, like, if you are somebody that's wanting to dance more in flats, but you don't feel like your technique is as strong, go for a shorter heel first.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that that's something that will be a good in between. Like, you still have a little bit of help, so it's not quite as hard on, on your body mechanics and whatnot to think about rolling through every single time, but it's still easier and it'll still look the same.
Mm-hmm. And just as a side note, Torri is like a great example of a dancer who dances just as well in flats as in heels.
Mhm.
And she switches up what kind of shoes she's dancing in all the time for her competitions. And that's why I actually have another video of her with Kyle, and she's not even in dance shoes at all. She's in
Yeah.
like tennis shoes.
Mhm.
And because her technique can support it, she still looks amazing dancing in these shoes.
Yeah. I had
And these are
something to
even
say.
stiffer shoes. Like she is working so hard
Yeah.
through her ankle and calf muscles to articulate these
Mhm.
shoes through this dance.
Yeah. I had something to say and I can't remember what it was all of a sudden.
No, hopefully it'll come back to you.
I hope so. Um, wait.
Do you want me to talk about something and you see if it comes to you?
Yes.
All right, cool. So back to my drawing of horror earlier, the concept of like if you're in flats, you have more range of motion to go through to hit your um, straightened foot. But
Hmm.
similarly, in a flat, you have less range of motion to get to a hyperflexed ankle.
Hmm. Oh, I know what I was
And
going to say.
oh, cool. Do you want me to finish my thought or do you want to get it out before you forget?
Finish your thought.
Okay. So, one of the things like if you want to be like uber scientist, watching Torri, who goes between both, you can see that she has in her muscle memory a certain degree of range of motion. She's like, okay, my ankle goes 45 degrees to point, and it goes like 20 degrees to flex.
Hmm.
And if you're in a heel, um, 45 degrees to point will get you to a full point. But if you're in a flat, 45 degrees will get you to a partial point.
Hmm.
And in the reverse, if you're in a heel and you go like 20 degrees to flex, you're going to get a nice relaxed flexed ankle. Whereas if you're in flats and you go 20 degrees to flex, it's going to look like a hyperflexed ankle.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yes, the goal is to get to that like that super pretty, for lack of a better word, of like what the heels will get you.
Hmm.
But I notice those degrees of muscle memory, like that's what is driving the body, and I applaud really consistent technique
Hmm.
like that. um and it's just literally the math, the geometry, if you will, of the
Hmm.
human ankle, uh when in different situations. So your turn, I'll shut up now.
um, so I was actually
Oh,
going to kind of say something
look at that.
along a
Jeez.
similar line. It's a nice point, and I would like to say that she is pointing with the ankle,
Mm-hmm.
not just with toes. You
Oh
point your
yeah.
feet, it needs to be from the ankle first.
Yeah,
Can't
yeah.
your toes.
Hey, hey, what I was talking about was topical and helpful. Sweet.
Um, so, what I wanted to mention was because you were talking about the degrees of flexibility and whatnot in the ankles. Like the type of shoe that you choose um, can also lend itself to what type of technique you use in terms of like heel lead or toe lead or the toe release. A lot of times, having flats will make it easier to do a heel lead
Mm-hmm.
because there's not that extra chunk of anything in between your heel and the floor. So
Right.
a lot of times, they will lead to more of that. And just because of the nature of the heel, when you have that extra couple inches or inch, whatever, um, underneath, like it's going to feel more comfortable a lot of times for you to do more of a toe lead or more of a toe release of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
And heel leads aren't necessarily going to feel as comfortable. Um, so if you do prefer one or the other, that's something to maybe.
Yeah. And that I think brings me to another soapbox, because I feel like at the beginner levels, we focus so much on footwork and we save pitch for later
Mhm.
that it just sets up people's muscle memories to work way too hard.
Yeah.
Whereas if you pitch correctly, um, it allows your feet to do the right thing. And if a heel lead is going to feel better for your body, you'll do a heel lead. If a toe lead is going to feel better for your body, you'll do a toe lead.
Mhm.
And it so pitch, and it's not perma pitch. You're not in the exact same pitch your entire dance, regardless of what role you're in. You're varying your pitch throughout.
Mhm.
Um, and that is a future episodes that we're gonna. It's gonna be a full-on workshop, I think. But remember that as you're working on your footwork, if you feel like you're just beating a dead horse and you can't figure out how to make your feet look better, try working on your pitch instead and see if that affects your footwork. And so that's one of the things for leaders. Like, pitch is so crucial to be able to counterbalance a follow. And your shoes can help you with that. If you're getting to the floor faster with a little bit of a heel, you can ground into it and pitch away from your follow and counterbalance them. It's easier to pitch away with a little bit of a heel, and that goes for both roles.
Speaking of, so one thing that you'll notice more when you are watching a follow in flats is how much they are leaving their heels up off the floor when they're doing like rotations and things like that. It's not as noticeable when you have a heel on that you are not fully in contact with the floor, but if you are in flats, like a lot of times you're going to go to that same kind of muscle memory spot. If you also have worn heels or, frequently change off, whatever. But it'll be more visible that you are more in a releve of sorts than if you have
right here.
Yeah.
Whereas it's more, if I go back to, wrong one. Melissa. All right.
Yeah.
So her heels kiss the ground a little bit.
So it's they're probably at about the same amount of distance with the heels to the floor, but because Melissa has heels on, there's less of that visual distance. But in the same thought, like if you do have heels on, it's a lot easier to get into that position where you are you have the heels released up off the floor because you are already in a position where you are having the heels higher up off the floor. You're kind of already angled a little bit more that way. So it's a lot easier to just kind of come up off of it slightly than it is when you are in flats. So that's something to think about too.
All right, so now we're coming to another potentially relevant topic for some of our viewers who maybe like me and are really tall. So another thing to consider is, as a follow in particular, if you are incredibly tall, adding just 1, if not 2 or 3 inches to your height can make following that much more difficult, because leaders are going to have that much harder of a time of clearing your head and making space for you if they don't have the skill for that yet. So Virginie is a great example of very tall follower. I believe she's my height, around 5'11", and she's pretty much exclusively danced in flats the past quite a few years. I haven't seen her dance in heels in a long time. The same thing can go if, like, you're a really tall leader. You may not want to add to that. And so that's a perfectly valid thing to take into consideration when you're choosing footwear. Because it is awkward being this tall in this dance, and I'm just slightly extra tall, unlike some other people I know who are super tall. And wow.
So we had a question. Somebody said, when dancing in the tennis shoe style like you are here, how is it affecting your turning and rotation? Tried in tennis shoe style. My knee feels cranked or twisted, and my soles feel stuck. How do you help with that?
So the great secret is that most people dancing in like off the rack tennis shoes that aren't dance shoes, they get them sueded. There is a brand called, I think it's Fuego, and they have this fascinating, almost like ball bearing under the ball of the foot. I think Glenn Ball is a spokesperson for them. But yeah, you just take them to a cobbler and you say, hey, could you suede the bottom of these? And usually what they'll do is they'll shave down some of the rubber sole, so that way your shoe isn't getting even taller. They shave it down and then they add suede to the bottom, and makes a huge difference. And if you are like in a financial pinch and you cannot afford dance shoes, you cannot, like, all you've got is your old tennis shoes, you got a couple of options. One, duct tape. You can duct tape the bottom of your shoes. I think Phoenix Gray used to do this, if I remember correctly. Or you can buy moleskin padding from the drugstore. And that can be a quick stopgap to add just some suede to the bottom of the ball of the foot. But yeah, so these are not off the rack tennis shoes, is my bet. And if they are so used, they don't have traction anymore.
Yeah. Andrew said sock over the shoe. You could. The other thing I want to address, because if you just are dancing in tennis shoes that don't have anything suede, so it will affect the turning and the rotation. You will be able to get maybe a little bit, but you're going to have to really stay up off of the heel of the foot. So like when you have dance shoes on, a lot of times you can turn when the foot is in full contact with the floor. But if you are in a tennis shoe with like more of the rubber sole, you're not going to be able to do that. And you're also going to have to change your turning technique. So typically, or at least what you should be doing, is if you're a follow, like when you're getting turned, right, you're kind of just letting the lead move you, but you won't be able to do that in this type of shoe where you have the rubber sole. Like you'll have to, instead of allowing the toe to rotate on the floor, you'll have to do turns where you're just taking step, 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 and you have like ever so slight amounts of rotation. You're not going to get much from that. So you can do it. I've done it. It's not fun. It will hurt your knees.
It's you want a shoe that you can comfortably just spin a full 360 on one foot comfortably without torquing your ankles and your knees. Because that's the kind of thing that if you're doing that to your joints once a week, if not more, for hours, that's going to result in a very no bueno situation later in your life. So please protect your body so you can keep dancing for your whole life.
Options: suede, change the turning technique, and really, like, those are the two things. Or just don't dance with tennis shoes.
Yeah. And I will say, because I once got an actual pair of sneakers sueded, it wasn't that expensive. It was like $25-30. And it would cost you just as much in like duct tape to do duct tape over and over. Just save up, maybe dance in socks while you're saving up to get your sneakers sueded.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. And I know they're less popular now, but the brand Tom's, just their basic slip-on shoe, that sole is totally danceable. And like some people really hate them, but like if that is what is accessible to you to protect yourself and to enjoy dancing, get them.
Yep. I will also say that I previously have gotten shoes that were just like normal shoes. I think they were like just the regular like knee-high type flat boots, and the soles on them were pretty worn, and so I was actually fine with dancing on the wooden floors and whatnot, even though it was just like a regular pair of shoes. So if you have a pair of shoes that are pretty worn, and they have like that smooth surface on it.
And also especially for people wanting more masculine shoes, a lot of like nice like masculine dress shoes have leather soles. They're not suede, they're leather, and you can dance in those too. Um, so that's also an option. I recently got a pair of American Duchess reproduction heeled Oxfords that have this gorgeous they're just they're so great. And they're a leather sole and I can dance in them, but I can also go outside in them. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
It's like femme Eris Allen's.
Yeah.
I love them so much. So there are lots of options. Yeah, we touched on it a little bit, but back to that judging question. So like a judge's job is to judge the technique and the skills of the dancer relative to the other dancers on the floor with them and the level of that division. I don't know. I feel like in this day and age, the clothing choices, the shoe choices, I personally would never use that as a deciding factor if I'm having a hard time picking between two dancers. I would instead really question if any personal biases, because we're all human, we all have biases, is a bias coming into play that is making this hard for me, and really look for the technique and don't punish someone just because they're in flats or reward someone just because they're in heels. Like look past that to the technique behind it.
And I think what it comes down to is just the look of it, not so much just the visual appearance of what's on the foot, but the look of what is the foot actually doing. And like even when you do have those less flexible heels on shoes, like you can still make it visually look like you're rolling through the foot. It'll still look a little bit different, but you still can make it happen. And if you are choosing to dance with those types of shoes, you should be able to do that. If you're competing, I would say. Like I would say that if you are not totally at that skill level where you are able to make any type of shoe look like you have that roll through, go with something that's gonna be somewhere in the middle. Like if there's something that you're just not comfortable with, like if you're not comfortable with like a really high heel, but you don't have that skill, go with the lower heel. So you still have something that is more flexible and also is a little bit more helpful to you in terms of what you have to think about when you're dancing, right? Because most dancers, like when you've been doing it for so long, you kind of get a certain type of muscle memory so that even when you do transition shoe to shoe, like I know I usually dance in heels, but even sometimes when I do dance in flats, like it's the same muscle memory, but it's just it changes the pitch a little bit. It changes kind of where my weight's at a little bit, but it's not something I have to really think about. And so I would say if you're at a point where you don't need to think about it, wear whatever shoe you want. If you're competing, if you are social dancing, wear what's most comfortable for you.
And if you have any sort of medical issue, pain issue, joint issue, old injury, new injury, don't be ashamed to choose footwear that supports you to have less pain so you can enjoy your dancing. If that's just where you're at in your dancing and that you need to compete in those, my hope is that most judges won't actually care. They'll be looking at your dancing, not your shoe. But I know that there is a bias out there. So you're not necessarily guaranteed to have that positive experience, but like your health is more important. So,
And if you're somebody that does feel really strongly about like the look of what shoe on you in particular, like, and you don't like flats, but you're most comfortable in flats, you can just do the majority of your dancing in flats. And if you're competing, throw some heels on, that way you're only in them for maybe 15 minutes or something like that. And then you're back into something that's better for your body.
Bingo.
Lots of different options.
You know what I miss? I miss my calluses from my like 5 years straight of dancing in supas. Cause like I never ever got blisters because I danced in them for hours and hours and hours and hours on end. And
Yeah.
like if I ever got a pedicure and I was like, don't take those off, I need those. So
A lot of hard work to get those.
it's a lot of hard work, and I know I'm looking down the road of doing that again with my new Torri sandals that are so stinking cute. But man, I'm not looking forward to the. I have delicate skin. That's gonna be a journey.
Yeah. I wish you the best on it.
That reminds me. There are some like very simple things, like if you are getting blisters, like let's say it's your left pinky toe. For some reason, your left pinky toe hates these shoes. They make little like cylindrical cushion thingies that you can just like slip onto your pinky toe, which will hopefully hold on better than a Band-Aid, because we all know Band-Aids don't stay on under dance shoes. It just doesn't happen. But they make all sorts, not just for like support underneath the bottom of your foot, but there are all sorts of things to help like cushioning around your heel or to prevent blisters around your heel, ways to protect your toes.
Moleskin.
Yeah. So if you love your shoes, but they're like causing you a little bit of pain, you don't have to suffer with it. There's probably a way to address it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another thing kind of on that note, like if you normally don't have a lot of pain, but when you're dancing, like you're starting to feel kind of achy or like you're getting really sore in one particular spot, shoes would be a good thing to look at, to maybe evaluate, like, are these affecting something? And next would be like a technique thing, but I think shoes would definitely come into play with that, if you are feeling like unusually sore or something like that.
Yeah. And then I'm also a huge fan of rolling out my feet with soft myofascial tools, especially at dance events.
Tennis balls.
Yeah. Tennis balls. I use the Jill Miller's yoga tune-up balls. And I actually have an affiliate link for them because I love them so much. So I'll try to remember to drop those in the description box below. They're a little bit softer, but they're not like mushy soft. And it just feels so good to roll out your feet, especially after a day at a dance event. And then it helps also with your circulation, so you go to sleep after that, and hopefully less edema the morning after.
Yep. So take care of your feet. Do what's best for you. Hopefully we answered the original question that we got. Well, multiple questions. There was multiple questions.
They were all juicy. Thank you so much for sending us that question, because they're great questions, and we love talking about them.
Yeah. So, all right, we spent an hour talking about feet.
We did.
Honestly, didn't think we were going to.
We have feelings.
Apparently so.
Feelings, and I drew a nightmare picture. Anyways, thank you all for joining us.
We'll see you all next time.